with Leonard Development Company and the 2020 president of Lambda Alpha Sacramento. I'm very pleased to have all of you with us today. This is our third Zoom meeting. This meeting is in lieu of our normal face-to-face meetings, and the board of directors has concluded that we're doing the right thing, which is good. And we have had very positive feedback and high participation in our Zoom presentations. I think it's due in part to Randy Goetz's ability to bring to us some great speakers. So that's a thank you very much, Randy, for that. And we all miss getting together. The social aspect of our group is important to us, I think, globally, but we have to continue to stand guard against this virus and do our best to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And as a result, the board has decided to continue to pursue Zoom meetings for the, normally in July and August, we are dark for the summer. Lambda Alpha takes the summer off. In the situation that we're in now, because we had a couple of canceled meetings early in the year, we're going to have great presentations in both July and August coming up, and you'll be receiving those invitations electronically from Suzanne Blackledge at Tammy Botts Event Planners. I wanted to also note before we get started that we have a sponsor this month, MMS Strategies, and Michelle Smyra is on the line. I'll introduce you in just a moment, Michelle, but I wanted to encourage our entire membership to consider sponsoring these events. We are in a bit of a interesting financial pickle as the board of directors, because we have essentially given up our opportunity for income because we're not meeting in person for luncheons. And as a result, there's an opportunity for our members to sponsor these luncheons. And I would strongly encourage you to consider an inexpensive monthly sponsorship of our Zoom meeting and an opportunity to make a brief presentation about your company. So please keep that in mind for both July and August, and forever for that matter. And we'll include some information about the sponsorship packages. With that, I'd like to introduce Michelle Smyra with MMS Strategies and ask you to say a few words about your company, and thank you again for your sponsorship of this month's meeting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. Love that you're doing this. I love participating in them. So again, Michelle Smyra, MMS Strategies. I've had this firm for about 15 years now, focused primarily on public affairs, government relations, a lot around land use, a lot around transportation in particular, and also solid waste, and have worked quite a bit at the airport over the years as well. So appreciate Cindy being here, and good to see you again virtually. But that's it.
Thank you very much for your sponsorship and for your words. And we look forward to seeing you at future meetings, and anybody else who has an interest in sponsoring, I would strongly encourage you to evaluate the offering. So with that, I'll introduce Randy Goetz. Randy is a longtime board member of the Sacramento chapter of Lambda Alpha and has taken the laboring oar of facilitating great guest speakers for us. Randy, could you take over?
Happily. Thank you, John. Let me introduce our speaker, Cindy Nichol. She is the Director of Airports for Sacramento County, which operates 4 airports. Sacramento International Airport is classified by the FAA as a medium hub and is the largest airport in the system, serving commercial airlines and passengers, all cargo airlines, and general aviation. Mather Airport was a U.S. Air Force base that was transferred to the county in 1995 and serves all cargo airlines, general aviation, and military aircraft operations. Executive Airport and Franklin Field are the county's general aviation airports. Cindy came to Sacramento from the Port of Portland, where as Chief Financial Officer, she partnered with other executives in setting the vision for 3 airports, 4 marine terminals, 5 industrial parks, and a partridge in a pear tree. I'm kidding. 4 marine terminals, 5 industrial parks, and a dredge. She was responsible for setting the port's financial direction, establishing fiscal policies with the commission, and communicating with investors, rating agencies, and other stakeholders. Cindy led a high-performing team providing financial services, analysis of business deals, capital planning, budget management, audits, safety, administrative services, and risk management. Major initiatives she was involved in include master planning, construction of a 6-gate terminal addition, and a rental car fuel and wash facility, bringing in new concessions, planning the development of a consolidated rental car facility, and initial planning of terminal core development. Prior to joining the port, she served as finance director at San Francisco International Airport. Prior to that, Cindy was a consultant with Lee Fisher Associates, where she led the firm's 60-person business and finance practice. She began her career with the Massachusetts Port Authority's planning department and then served in its Department of Administration and Finance. Cindy has a BA in history from Carleton College, a Master in African Studies from the University of London, and a Master of Public Policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. And as a side note, I should mention that you can tell a Harvard woman, but you cannot tell her much. Cindy was chair of the Finance Steering Committee for Airports Council International, ACI, North America in 2014 and 2015, served as vice chair of the ACI World Economics Committee in 2015 and 2016, and then ascended to the chair of the ACI World Economics Committee in 2017 and 2018. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Cindy Nichol.
Great, thank you so much, Randy. Also John and Suzanne for inviting me, and Michelle for your sponsorship, that's great. So I think Suzanne's gonna share my presentation at this point. Great, thank you very much. So I wanted to talk today about our airport's growth and recovery from all the COVID impacts that we've had. So just turning to the agenda on the next page, every day really is an adventure. Last week we posted a video on our website showing passengers everything that we're doing to keep them healthy and safe as they travel through the airport. And then within about an hour, the governor issued the order to requiring face masks. So we've had to take that video down and just re-recorded it yesterday. So we'll be putting that back up. So if you are interested, do take a look at that. It should be up by the end of the week. Then on Sunday, this just sort of gives you a sense of things that we get to deal with. On Sunday, a Cessna airplane landed and the pilot forgot to put the landing gear down. Everyone was fine, but they did kind of just do a belly landing. So you never know what's going to happen. It's always interesting. But today I'm going to pull up and talk about how the Sacramento County Airport served the region, how the region's economy drives aviation demand, and how the airports now face tough financial pressures, as everyone does, and then what we're doing to position the airports to address current critical needs. So turning to the next slide, the way we think about our service to the region is really in terms of the primary and secondary service areas. So the primary service area that we have for International Airport comprises the 7 counties shown here. And the secondary service area is the other 11 counties also listed here. For a number of those counties, we compete for passengers with, in particular, Oakland, but to a lesser degree with San Francisco, San Jose, Stockton, and Redding airports, depending on what passengers are looking for. So you can see that we have about 3.2 million people, residents in the primary service area, and about 2.3 million visitors who normally have flown into the international airport to visit the area each year. So turning to the next slide. So really, the next few slides are going to show it's been a period of mixed progress and then regression, I guess you would say. So when I came to the airport at the end of October of 2018, we were in a period of rapid growth, which we have now had until March for 6 years. And the problem was, while we had enough airfield capacity to last 20 years, in every other type of facility pretty much at the international airport, we were out of capacity. And so we were experiencing a lot of crowding, a lot of issues with both serving the airlines as well as our passengers. A lot of people may have tried to go in and out on Uber and Lyft, and we had to move our Uber and Lyft pickup spot at the Terminal B because we had 5 spaces available and we needed more than 50 during peak periods. So that's the kind of crunch that we were experiencing. So if we look at the next slide, you can see here, these are daily TSA counts through the checkpoint. So it's mostly passengers, but some employees. And you can see that because of COVID-19, our traffic just took a nosedive. So we were really down. April 20th was our worst day. We're slowly recovering now. And if you turn to the next slide, we are looking again, the prognosis is pretty uncertain in terms of our outlook. There are a good number of positive fundamentals that I think are going to be good for us. There are some things that are also matters of concern. So on this slide, we pulled a lot of information from Oxford Economics, and you can see that our economic fundamentals have improved since the Great Recession. We're in the upper quartile of 2020 metro GDP growth, according to Oxford Economics, at a little less than 6%. But it's also true that no metro area is going to escape the economic disruption that's been caused by the sudden stop in activity, which I'm sure you're all dealing with. If we go to the next slide, there is hope. So as I mentioned, another thing from Oxford Economics, you can see we're better poised to weather the COVID-19 crisis economically. We're in the upper right quadrant there of medium-term metro GDP growth. And then if you go to the next slide, but of course, we're all talking about what kind of recovery are we going to have? The uncertainties around, is it going to be a V-shaped recovery, a U-shaped recovery, a W? Are we going to have a double dip? You know, how long is the recovery going to take? There's a lot of great information out there about the different times that we've experienced economic downturns and how long has it taken us to recover. It doesn't help that we had the recent spike in Sacramento County of cases as well as hospitalizations. So there's a lot that we're trying to deal with. And I'll just say on this slide, we haven't done a projection per se. Rather, we're doing scenarios where we're monitoring based on those daily TSA counts, the bookings that we're seeing, the advanced bookings that we're seeing from airlines, et cetera, to get a feel for what trajectory are we on, and you know, how do we need to be positioning ourselves. So if you go to the next slide, you can see on the next slide. So we've had to really do a 180-degree change in our financial management. And now really, well, it was capacity and facility needs that were driving a lot of our decision making. Now it's really our financial outlook. We're needing to be financially prudent while positioning ourselves for growth. We don't know if that's going to be slow growth or not. As I showed you earlier, our passenger volumes tanked in April and they were down by 95% in April. And now we're much better at only down 75%. So if you do the math off the base, it was more than 200% increase or something. The airlines didn't reduce their schedules by as much. So the worst month for us was May, when the schedules were down 59%. They are adding back service now. To some extent, sometimes that's a function of our own local orders. Sometimes it's a function of orders. Hawaii has been a big question. Southwest and Hawaiian Airlines both want to be going into that market, and so they're having to wait for the governor there to make decisions on allowing people to come back. So interestingly, our general aviation operations by private pilots fell by less than our passenger volumes, fell by 60% in April, and it was down 28% in May, so much better. And if we all think about how much online ordering everyone's been doing, our cargo airlines are busier than ever. And we have cargo airlines, as Randy mentioned, both at International Airport as well as Mather. So because airports are essential, all have remained open, and we've continued to operate 24/7. About 3/5 of our employees work on site at the airports and have continued to do so. And to the extent that we could allow people to work from home, it was about the other 2/5. We're slowly starting to bring people back, but we're paying attention to the daily information on what's going on with the county and the state's orders. We instituted a lot of measures to protect passengers and employees, working with TSA, working with the airlines, and hopefully that video will be up soon and you'll be able to see that. We also took the opportunity to do major maintenance that's been required in high trafficked areas. So for example, there's one of the lanes that's in front of Terminal A. We were able to get in and strip it and do some repaving there, just for example. A lot of other examples of that. As I mentioned, we've had to do a 180 in terms of our financial planning. Thank goodness we got CARES Act money through FAA. And just thinking about it in the most simple way, it covers about 3 months of our expenses. So we felt it was prudent to share some of that benefit with our tenants, and we've given them relief for the 3 months of April through June. The relief is different. It depends on what type of tenant. We can talk about that later if you have questions about that. We've also undertaken comprehensive cost cutting. In addition to these things that are shown here, we actually are using some of that CARES Act money to defease about 35 million of our debt, which will help quite a lot. That defeasance will be effective on Thursday. So very timely and helpful for us. If we go to the next slide, just continuing on this theme about the tough financial pressures that we face, I did want to characterize for you what we're doing at each airport. So at International Airport, SMF, we are positioning for resumption of activity and growth. Quite honestly, this COVID-19 challenge has kind of given us some breathing room with all the things that were a challenge. As I mentioned, we're good on airfield capacity for more than 20 years. We did, and we were already doing this pre-COVID and got it done before COVID, but we rehabbed the west runway from asphalt to concrete. And so that was done in October. We're also now continuing with certain key projects. If you've been in Terminal A, you know that we're still kind of working on expanding that checkpoint, getting the escalator down to more align with where people come out. We have gotten a FAA AIP grant, federal grant from FAA, which will fund about 60–65% of our new fire station. We're also, as I mentioned, cargo operators have continued to grow. And here you'll see at the end of the presentation, we just opened last month a 40,000 square foot cargo facility, and now we have demand for more cargo facilities. So we'll probably be developing those in the far north side of the airport, just on the very top of the screen, actually a little bit north of the top of the screen there. This is north-south orientation. We're also going to be extending Elkhorn Boulevard, which comes kind of in the lower right part of this picture. And right now, Elkhorn Boulevard ends at the Metro Airpark, which is our neighbor. And we are in the process of now designing a road, and then we'll be constructing a road that will kind of make a loop and come up from the east up where the AM/PM station is there, where you see that big intersection. Not with I-5, but the one to the north. We'll also need to do some aircraft parking if we can get FAA grants for that, so we're proceeding with that. Also, kind of big picture, you all, this is kind of in your realm, although airport master planning has some additional requirements, of course, unique to airports, but we're in the process of proceeding with the master plan update for the airport, and it will set the vision for the next 20 years. And we will be starting the environmental process under CEQA. Our colleagues, Leanne Moffett, whom you all know, and her staff will be conducting that. And then we'll be, the FAA actually leads the the NEPA process, which will be starting probably early next year. They're probably going to be fairly sequential in doing the CEQA and the NEPA process. So that's International Airport. So the list used to be a lot longer in terms of things that we're doing, and now it's pretty consolidated. If we go to the next slide, you can see at Mather Airport, we're investing in advanced planning and some critical assets there. I always start in thinking about our airport facilities with first principles. What must be at an airport? Of course, the airfield with the runways, the taxiways, all of that, and the instrument landing system. So we're going to be progressing the runway rehabilitation and instrument landing system so that aircraft can come in when visibility is down to 200 feet. That will help UPS, for example, operate when we're in the winter when we get a lot of fog. We'll also be extending the short runway so that when we're rehabbing the long runway, we will, UPS and others will continue to be able to operate at the airport. That runway, by the way, is a huge asset. It's 11,000 feet compared to 8,600 feet at International. So having a runway of that length is huge, especially where you have hot weather, because large cargo carriers can take off without taking a payload cut. So they don't have to reduce the amount of cargo that they're carrying if you have a longer runway. We're also completing the, I need to say this right, this is not quite right, quite right here, as Leanne would point out. It's the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, which we are going to update going through SACOG. Probably that will conclude also around the spring of next year. We're also expecting to see some upcoming investments by a third party, by UPS for new cargo facilities there. They've just been operating at the ramp so far. So I think they're now going to be proceeding with developing actual buildings and putting a lot of employees there. And we're going to realign the taxiway. So again, not a ton that we're doing there given the current situation, but again, positioning ourselves for what's to come in the future and starting with first principles. So if we go to the next slide, looking at Executive Airport. So Executive Airport is a general aviation airport. Used to be, some of you may remember, when it was the commercial service airport. That's why we have such nice parking and a pretty large terminal building there. Everything is fairly old. The challenge is that general aviation airports generally lose money. So in particular, here at Executive, we do cover our costs after operating costs from the revenues we generate there, but we don't cover our capital costs. So the other thing that is unique about this airport, very few airports are like this in the country, but we have a lease. This airport is owned by the city of Sacramento, and we have a 25-year evergreen lease so that every year the expiration of that lease is always 25 years out, unless one or the other of us says we don't want to renew in 25 years. So that continues to roll. I think just obviously revenues have been stagnant while our maintenance costs have not been. And since you guys are interested in land use at the very bottom, you can see there that we have a challenge, which is people whose property has trees on it are supposed to keep them at a level that doesn't interfere with the approaches to the runways, but we are challenged by that, much of which is on private property. So it becomes a challenge to get them to cut their trees and help us with that issue. Moving to the next slide. So Franklin Field is super small. If you've been down there, what you see on the right side there is actually a jail and a correctional institution. And most of what we have there is the 2 runways and taxiways. We have a little bit of additional development, basically 12 tenants who have portable hangars there, but otherwise it's really not much. The challenge there is that pretty much floods quite often, sometimes every winter, which tends to degrade the pavement. So that's a challenge for us as well. So as a general aviation airport, primarily serving flight training as well as some of the aircraft that are spraying fields. It's really kind of it's our smallest airport in size as well as use. So if we go to the last slide. So this just summarizes, I love this, one of my staff provided this to me, we're on the runway to recovery. So I like to think that's true. So we are advancing industry best practices, as I mentioned, in protecting passengers and employee health and safety. That's our #1 concern. Safety is always our #1 concern at our airports. And now we've got the health aspect added to that. As I said, we are positioning ourselves to weather the economic challenges. By the way, I meant to mention earlier, we do not get any tax revenues that the county receives. We are one of the 3 enterprise departments of the county, and we stand on our own, in our own tub, as each tub on its own bottom, as they say. We're continuing to seek air service to underserved and unserved markets. And it looks like some of our service, for example, to Mexico is already back, and we may even get some additional cities added soon, hoping the same for Canada. Ideally, I would like to see service to Europe, which we've been working on for a long time. As you can imagine, that's very challenged by the COVID situation. So, you know, this does take years and years and years of effort to show that we have the demand here to support such service. We'll continue to do that. We're also a bit challenged in terms of service to the East Coast, long haul flights, but I think we're going to see those coming back hopefully quite soon. We have some service, but we'll be getting more, for example, to Boston and JFK and other airports. I mentioned Mather. We're going to continue to position ourselves with the planning and the critical airfield projects in particular, as well as cargo by a third party, and looking for optimal ways to invest in improvements at the 2 general aviation airports, Franklin Field and Executive. So going to the last slide, these are photos of our different airports. I did want to point out down in the lower right, you can see that's the new 40,000 square foot cargo facility that Aeroterm is operating, and it's already full. So that's terrific, and they are cranking it out. So that was it. I was really wanting to make sure that there was time for questions that you might have. So I'll just open it up. I don't know, Randy or John, if there's a process you use for this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Nancy Park. I'm with Best Western Krieger. So I understand that the airport makes some of its money or all of its money from fees that it charges to the commercial airlines based on the number of flights. And I don't know if capacity has anything to do with that. But given that there is a much larger influx or volume of the cargo flights, do you tend to make it up a little bit on the cargo side, or how does the revenue split work, and how might that be influenced in the future given maybe an increase in cargo over the long term?
That's a super great question, and it gets to one of the more complex aspects of our business model. We have an airline agreement which will go through 2027 unless the airlines vote not to continue in 22. But basically the way that's structured is all of our costs for the airfield and terminal are cost recovery. So we don't make any money on a net basis for the airfield or terminal buildings. We even credit 40% of the revenue that we get from non-airline functions like parking, rental cars, concessions. We credit that to the airlines. So we take their total costs, direct and allocated, and we credit the 40% of concession and non-airline revenues, and the net is what we're solving for. So the way that they pay for gates is based on square feet. The way they pay for use of the airfield is based on landed weight. And so, great question. What happens is when we get more cargo carriers coming in, it reduces what everyone else needs to pay. So that's the answer. Do you have any questions?
Fascinating. I had no idea.
This is John Shirey. Can I be heard okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to follow on to Nancy's question. Your predecessor inherited a incredible debt service requirement for that airport, largely due to the overbuilding and overly ambitious building of Terminal B. You, of course, still have to service that same debt, but I heard you say that you're going to be able to defease some of that. I'm just curious to know a little bit more about how has the airport been able to manage through these up and down economic cycles to continue to make that overhanging debt service. And how you're in another trough, so to speak. And I mean, I just don't see how the numbers work, to tell you the truth, but tell us all more about how you're managing that.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. So yes, my predecessor did inherit a very high debt airport. One thing I'll mention is, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but for those of you who've been here a long time, you may remember that there was an old Terminal B and a commuter facility. The total number of gates for those two was 19 gates. And so this new Terminal B replaces those two facilities. So the person before my predecessor, John Wheat, did that project, which replaced 19 gates with 19 gates. Now, there are efficiencies from some of the way that the terminal works, but it was a very high cost to do that. So that was one of the challenges I was dealing with when we were in a capacity crunch. What I will also say is, just like our mortgages, over time, you're paying down a portion of your principal. So naturally, each year that's passed since 2011, when the terminal opened, we've been reducing the principal. John Wheat did a lot in terms of doing some refundings when bonds were callable. And we had been planning here to do another refunding when COVID-19 hit. So we're still planning to do a refunding this fall. And we're combining that. We've strategized extensively with our debt team to identify which tranches of debt we should defease. So that all helps. What helped me, quite honestly, was by the time I came in, so we're thinking about two things. One is, what's the total cost that you're on the hook for? And then what's your activity to support that, to pay for that? So with the increase in activity that I showed you, our landed weight was up, our number of passengers was up. So that really helped spread those high costs over more traffic. So so with this funny structure, which is called a residual structure, where the airlines pay the net, how do you know if you're doing well or not? We think about it in terms of what's the cost to the airlines per person getting on a plane. So at the height, I think it was probably 2005, the cost per plane was about $8. At the height of like in 2011, 2012, that time frame, it went up to $17 per enplanement. So if Southwest is charging $70 for a flight, a lot of that was getting eaten up by the cost to the airline, to the airport. Mm-hmm. Now, last year we got it down to $10.69. So we've made a lot of improvement through all of the cost cutting that John did, additional cost cutting we've done since, and the defeasance. So that's kind of how it works. I hope that's helpful.
No, that's very helpful. If I could follow on with another question. I had discussions with John Wheat about sort of your airport master planning effort. Uh-huh. And really it was very hard, if you were objective, to justify executive airport. I mean, its very existence. And you've also reflected on Franklin Field, which is even smaller. It's always seemed to me that we've had more airports in our region than we need. But I'm sure that you know, tiptoeing around the idea of somehow doing away with executive airport is probably not in anybody's political future. But what can you say about going forward with executive airport? I mean, you've already explained it sort of barely supports itself, but there's no money for capital improvements. And by the way, there's no money to pay for its stormwater fees, which it has sort of danced around for a few decades now. And it's all because of the fact the airport is just not really financially sustainable.
That's another great question. So the way our model works is the deficits that are experienced at Executive Airport and Franklin Field go into our landing fee here. So the airlines are paying that. Now, in the scheme of things, the deficit is not maybe huge. It's about $3 million a year. Still, that's $3 million a year, but it also, you're right, is we don't have a lot of money to invest in capital, which is always very high cost. So it's hard, and I've worked at many multi-airport systems in both as a on staff and also as a consultant, and it's very hard to close airports. FAA has to agree to it, and the most recent example is Santa Monica, which actually owns and operates that airport. And I think it's been, I might be wrong, but I think so far it's been about a 30-year process. They had to sue the FAA, and I believe they'll be able to close that airport in another decade or two. So it's a long, long process. And the complication for us is Executive is owned by the city, but we're operating it. So we're the entity that has taken grants, and we're the airport sponsor. So I've talked to FAA at all levels, the local level, the regional level, the headquarters level. None of them really know what to do with that question.
Not surprised.
I have a question. My name is Val Toppenberg.
Hi, Val.
And hi, I'm working at my house now, and the airplanes that fly over my house that come out of Executive Airport are they don't have markings on their wings, and I'm curious as to their requirement for markings, because a couple of airplanes fly over multiple times a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the requirement is for private aircraft. Every aircraft has a tail number, but while commercial service aircraft are required to have markings underneath the wings, private aircraft are not.
Well, I don't see markings on their tails or wings or anything.
They're probably pretty small.
They're what?
They're probably small, the tail numbers. I'll look at some, but yeah, so your point is it's hard for you to say XYZ aircraft flew over my house and to be able to pinpoint who that was.
Yeah.
He'd like to call you about it, Cindy, if he could. This is John Leonard. Cindy, if I could, I had a couple quick observations and a question. I think the first or second slide that you had up showed an average daily passenger load of approximately 16,000 at SMF. Is that right? I'm sorry.
The number of people going through, that's, I think you're talking about the one where I showed that we hit bottom.
Right, but
That
I
one?
thought that the end of last year was showing a
Yeah.
daily traffic of 16. I'm not sure if I.
Those are the counts. Actually, no, that's, Yeah, excuse me. So those are the counts from the TSA checkpoints. It includes, and I should have said this, it's total people going through the checkpoint. So it's passengers as well as some employees. Yeah.
Great.
But our total, can I just give you a little more color around that? So we right now are at about 50,000 passengers in and out per day. Sorry, yeah. And that should be, sorry, I misspoke, 5,000. And it's going to go, we think it'll be higher than that. So sorry, go ahead.
The second comment, and which turns to a question, was I'm very pleased with SMF. I use it a lot, and Terminal B is fantastic, and I love all the art in both A and B and on the driveways in and out of the property. Love the rabbit. I actually, side note on the executive airport, I was actually at the air show when the tragedy at Farrell's occurred. You probably were not here, of course, but the jet that flew into Farrell's, I was at the air show executive, and has changed executive for forever, I think, in some ways. But it brings me to my two parallel questions. With regard to SMF, I'm wondering how Amazon this decision was made to go at Metro Air Park versus at Mather with the longer, higher capacity runway, and Amazon's impact on SMF. And secondly, there's always been a long-standing debate, discussion among Sacramentans about the fog and birds at SMF and how you might be dealing with those. I thought maybe if you could take just a moment and hit on those two subjects briefly.
Sure. So we cannot tell an air carrier where to go. We must accept anyone who wants to fly in. So the way this is kind of, I mean, our ideal is for all of the cargo to be at Mather, but we can't force anyone to do that. So we do have UPS and DHL there, but Amazon prefers SMF. The facilities that they've put at Metro Air Park do not have airfield access. So they are operating on airport, where they do have airfield access, and then those facilities, the facility off airport is a fulfillment center where packages get sorted, and you know, some of the packages, actually, I don't know what percent, but some of them are coming from the airport, some are coming from other locations by truck. They get sorted and then sent back out by truck. So they're making different decisions because of the advantages they see, because of the great location and connectivity for Metro Air Park near I-5 and other highways.
Okay.
And then with regard to the fog and birds, so that's kind of two different things. So it's one of our challenges is that we are on the Pacific Flyway for birds. And so what can we do about it? We have 2 full-time wildlife biologists who spend their time thinking about and enacting ways to discourage birds from being near the airport. And there are different techniques for that. Sometimes it's sound, making sure the habitat is inhospitable to them, those kinds of things. We also need to make sure that we don't have large bodies of water that are present year-round that are attractants to birds. So as we see development happening in the environs outside International Airport as well as Mather, we're trying to ensure that the developments don't have those kinds of bird attractants. So we do everything we can to try to minimize those kinds of interactions. Sometimes literally it's my staff going out and chasing birds away. They have very large, loud horns and things like that, but it's kind of a collection of things. With regard to fog, that's where the instrument landing systems come in. So at International Airport right now, we have what's called a Category 3 instrument landing system, which enables operations in the greatest amount of fog and least amount of visibility safely. And we have a category 2 at Mather now, which we just put in. And part of the changes that we're talking about doing there, which will be in a couple years, is to have the same category 3 instrument landing system there. I hope that answered all your questions.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
I have another question, if I may.
Sure.
So these are consumer-oriented questions.
Uh-huh.
What is the busiest traffic day at the airport, busiest sort of day and time, and the least busy? And also, why does it take so darn long to get your luggage when you check a bag at Sacramento, but it doesn't at other airports?
Yes, good questions. So the busiest times of day, generally ignoring seasons, is 5:30 to about 7 a.m. every day on the weekdays. And that's because, given our geographic location, we have a lot of aircraft that are flying east of here. And so given the time changes, in particular for flights to the Midwest, as well as to the East Coast, those planes need to leave early. So that's why we have that crunch. And then just, kind of peaks, it kind of varies by day of week, but generally Wednesdays, Thursdays are pretty darn busy. In terms of seasons, I think the most passengers we have are generally, I think it's around the Thanksgiving timeframe, just because that's a more constrained period. That's in normal times when people are actually traveling to see relatives. I don't know what it's going to look like this year. So that hopefully answers your first question. And then why it takes so long to get your luggage. It's partly the design of the terminal. What has to happen is the bags come off in Terminal B, you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So in Terminal B, the bags come off the aircraft and are put on tugs, and those tugs basically come down into down under Terminal B, and then they're loaded onto the belts to be brought up to the luggage carrier areas. And that just takes a bit of time. One of the things that I'm trying to get staff to do is change the designation of which bag carousel we're going to be using for which flights. What the practice has been to wait until the tug is down in the basement and they know which one they're taking the bags off to. I think we should be able to schedule those in advance, which I think would help a little bit with the uncertainty. But unfortunately, it's a design feature of this terminal.
Carry-ons, Nancy. That's the trick.
Yeah, that's what I do. Even when I go to Ethiopia, I'm carrying on.
Wear several layers.
Right.
Any other questions? Randy, I know you're still in charge, but.
No, I think we'll conclude. I was going to say a couple of things. One, Cindy, you're an incredibly competent leader, and
thank you.
I'm only saying that because it's true. And we are fortunate as a region to have you as the head of the airports. And then the second thing, when I was reading your bio earlier, what prompted the Master's in African Studies at the University of London? I think that is so cool. Seriously, that's just awesome.
Thank you for that question. So I got hooked on aviation when I was a kid growing up in far western Ethiopia, where my dad was a doctor in very rural hospitals. So for 6 months of the year, the roads from the capital Addis Ababa to where we lived were impassable. The dirt roads became rivers. So the only way we could get to where I grew up was by flying. And the Ethiopian Airlines was created by the Ethiopian government buying a bunch of World War II aircraft from the US, I guess army at that point. And so they created Ethiopian Airlines. And we used to fly in those planes around. They would puddle jump around to like 4 different places when we were growing up. And I'll just say one more thing, which is the last place we lived in Ethiopia, there was a plane, you landed, it was a plateau, and you either stopped in time or you didn't. When we moved there, there was a plane that was down in the ravine, and somehow the cockpit of that aircraft ended up on the hospital compound 40 miles away where my dad worked. And so when we were kids, we used to get to play in that cockpit and pretend we were Ethiopian Airlines pilots.
Unbelievable. That's so great. No, really, my wife and I were in Africa about 3 years ago on safari, and it was just such a special experience. And to think that you are both from there and have had the opportunity to study in London, I just think that's awesome.
Yep, thank you.
John, you want to call it?
Sure. So Cindy, on behalf of Lambda Alpha and everybody who was able to participate in this presentation, I'm very appreciative. The board of directors thanks you for your time and your knowledge and your service to our county. And thank you for such a great presentation. And also I'd like to say thank you to Michelle Smyra and MMS Strategies for sponsoring today, and have you all consider sponsoring our future events as well. And Cindy, please feel free to join us if you'd like to listen to some of our great presentations coming up.
Thank you.
I thank you all for participating, and I hope you have a wonderful balance of your week. And with that, I say to you, good day, and have a great week ahead.
Thanks, Cindy.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you for your questions.
Take care. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Cindy.
Absolutely.